You've probably noticed this. You explain something carefully. You slow down, you choose simple words. The other person listens, they nod, they even agree, and yet somehow nothing changes. The same mistake repeats, the same confusion comes back, the same conversation happens again. At some point you start wondering, is this really a communication problem? Niccolò Machiavelli spent his life watching people in power face this exact situation. Not in conversations, but in courts, councils, and cities, he noticed something uncomfortable. Most people don't fail to understand because ideas are unclear. They fail because they process the world in a much narrower way. They respond to emotion, habit, and authority, not careful reasoning. So when you keep explaining, you're not helping them understand. You're doing something else, something Machiavelli warned leaders never to do. Machiavelli never assumed people were rational. This is the first mistake most intelligent people make. They believe that if an idea is logical, it will eventually be accepted. If it's explained clearly, it will be understood. If they stay calm and patient, things will improve. Machiavelli saw the opposite. He observed that most people don't respond to reasoning first. They respond to position, who is speaking, from where, with how much certainty. Understanding often comes later, if it comes at all. This is why explaining yourself too much quietly works against you. Not because explanation is bad, but because who you explain to matters more than how you explain. When someone keeps asking you to explain yourself, it doesn't always mean they want clarity. Very often, it means they are unsure whether they should accept your position. So they ask, why did you do that? Why does it have to be this way? Can you explain that again? On the surface, these seem like honest questions, but Machiavelli noticed something important. Questions can also be a way to test authority. Each explanation slows the interaction down. Each clarification opens the door to doubt. Each added reason turns a decision into a discussion. And once something becomes a discussion, the person asking the questions feels equal to the one answering them. That shift is subtle but powerful. The problem is not intelligence, it's position. This is where people misunderstand Machiavelli. He wasn't saying people are stupid. He was saying people are situational. Most people don't ask, is this correct? They ask, who is saying this? Do others accept it? What happens if I don't? So when you keep explaining yourself, you unintentionally move yourself into a weaker position. You look like someone seeking approval, not someone setting direction. And people respond accordingly. Not everyone should be spoken to in the same way. Some people can handle reasoning. They think step by step. They can sit with uncertainty and complexity. But most people prefer clarity over truth, certainty over nuance, direction over discussion. When you give long explanations to people who don't process that way, they don't feel informed, they feel overwhelmed. And overwhelmed people don't respect you more. They resist, withdraw, or quietly ignore you. This is why you can explain something perfectly and still watch it be misunderstood. The invisible cost of over-explaining. Every time you explain yourself again, you spend energy, you lose momentum. You reopen a closed decision. Machiavelli believed momentum was essential to power. A leader who keeps stopping to explain appears uncertain, even if they're not, and uncertainty spreads faster than logic. Soon others start questioning things, not because something is wrong, but because questioning has been normalized. This is how authority slowly orders, not through rebellion, but through endless conversation. What Machiavelli actually advised. Machiavelli didn't say never explain. He said choose carefully who gets access to your reasoning. To some people you give reasons. To most you give outcomes, not out. Not out of cruelty, out of realism. Because when people see that decisions stand, that they don't bend with every question, they stop testing, and when testing stops, respect begins. The mistake is not explaining once. The mistake is explaining again to someone who already showed they won't or can't process it. Machiavelli would say this is not patience, it's misplaced effort. Power starts when you recognize not everyone is meant to understand. Not every question deserves an answer. Not every conversation should continue. Once you see that, you stop feeling frustrated, and people start responding to you differently without you saying more. Machiavelli understood something most people never learn. The problem is not that you explain. The problem is that you explain to everyone. In his world, courts, armies, councils, explaining to the wrong person was not just tiring. It was dangerous, so he learned to sort people quickly. Not by intelligence tests, not by education, but by behavior, the first signal, how people react to decisions. Machiavelli paid close attention to what happened after a decision was made. Some people reacted like this. They listened, they adjusted, they moved on. Others reacted differently. They kept asking questions. They reopened settled matters. They looked for exceptions. This told Machiavelli everything. The first group didn't need explanations to comply. The second group didn't want explanations. They wanted leverage, so he learned a rule. If someone accepts outcomes first, they may deserve reasoning later. If someone resists outcomes, reasoning will not help them. The second signal: what questions people ask. Not all questions are equal. Machiavelli noticed that capable people ask questions that move things forward. What's the goal? What's the constraint? What happens next? But people who weaken authority ask different questions. Why me? Why this way? Who decided this? These questions are not about understanding. They are about position. They test whether a decision is firm or open to pressure. Machiavelli advised leaders to answer these questions carefully or not at all. Because once people sense that every decision can be debated, they begin debating everything. The third signal: how people handle simple instructions. Machiavelli believed this was the clearest test. Before giving complex reasoning, he watched how people handled simple direction. Did they follow it? Did they look for loopholes? Did they delay? Someone who struggles with simple clarity will drown in complex explanation. So instead of explaining more, Machiavelli simplified his demands and watched reactions. Those who complied earned trust. Those who resisted earned distance. Here is the mistake most people make. They think explanation creates respect. But Machiavelli saw that, for many people, explanation creates permission. Permission to argue, permission to negotiate, permission to challenge. Once permission exists, authority weakens quietly. This is why Machiavelli warned leaders not to expose their reasoning to everyone. Not because the reasoning was wrong, but because it would be misused. Machiavelli believed every leader needed a small inner circle. A few people who could think ahead, could understand complexity, could be trusted with. They think explanation creates respect. But Machiavelli saw that, for many people, explanation creates permission. Permission to argue, permission to negotiate, permission to challenge. Once permission exists, authority weakens quietly. This is why Machiavelli warned leaders not to expose their reasoning to everyone. Not because the reasoning was wrong, but because it would be misused. Machiavelli believed every leader needed a small inner circle. A few people who could think ahead, could understand complexity, could be trusted with reasoning. This group got explanations, context, strategy. Everyone else got direction. Not because they were worthless, but because systems collapse when everyone feels entitled to full understanding. Clarity is not the same as equality. You don't need to cut people off. You don't need to be rude. You don't need to dominate conversations. You just need to stop assuming that every person deserves the same level of access. Some people earn explanation through responsibility. Others earn it through consistency. Most never earn it at all, and that's normal. When you explain less to the wrong people, conflict decreases, resistance fades. Your words carry more weight. Machiavelli didn't argue endlessly. He observed, adjusted, and positioned himself correctly. When you stop explaining yourself, the first thing that happens is discomfort. Not yours, theirs. People are used to explanations because explanations make them feel involved. When that stops, they feel unsettled. They don't know where they stand anymore. And uncertainty makes most people uneasy. At first, they try to pull you back into the old pattern. They ask more questions. They repeat the same ones. They say things like, "I'm just trying to understand," or "You're being unclear." What they are really saying is that the usual flow has been interrupted. They no longer feel in control of the interaction. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this reaction very well. He knew that when people lose access to reasoning, they don't become curious, they become restless. And restlessness often turns into testing behavior. So the questions increase, the tone changes slightly. There is a hint of challenge where there used to be agreement. This is not because your decision was wrong. It's because the person is trying to see if silence means weakness. Most people misread this moment. They feel the tension and rush to fix it. They explain again, they clarify, they soften their position, and the moment they do, the pressure stops, the other person relaxes, not because they understand, but because the old order has been restored. This is the trap. Machiavelli observed that authority is not destroyed all at once. It orders slowly through small concessions that feel polite and reasonable at the time. One explanation turns into another. One clarification becomes an argument. And before you notice it, every decision requires approval. But when you hold your position and don't rush to explain, something else happens. After the initial discomfort, most people adjust. They stop asking the same questions. They stop pushing. They begin to accept that not everything is open for discussion. This acceptance doesn't come from understanding. It comes from recognition. They recognize that your decisions don't move just because they are uncomfortable. And that recognition changes behavior. People listen more closely when they know you won't repeat yourself endlessly. They pay attention because they know they won't get unlimited chances. Your words start to carry weight again, not because they are longer or clearer, but because they are final. There is also another reaction, one that Machiavelli warned about. A small number of people don't adjust. They escalate, they become sarcastic, passive, dismissive. They question your motives instead of your reasoning. This is not confusion, it's resistance. These people relied on explanation as a way to slow things down or regain influence. When that tool disappears, frustration shows itself. This reaction is important information. It tells you exactly who depended on access to your reasoning to feel equal. And Machiavelli would say this is not someone you try harder with. It's someone you manage carefully or keep at a distance. Silence in this sense is not avoidance. It is a filter. It separates those who can function with structure from those who need constant reassurance. It shows you who respects outcomes and who only respects discussion. Another change happens quietly over time. When you stop explaining, people start filling in the gaps themselves. They assume there is a reason even if they don't know it. They assume there is intention behind your decisions. This assumption often works in your favor. Machiavelli knew that people fear what they don't fully understand, but they also respect it. Mystery creates gravity. Overexposure dissolves it. This doesn't mean you become distant or silent in everything. It means you stop narrating your thinking to people who can't use it properly. You let results speak. You let consistency speak. You let time speak. Eventually, something stabilizes. Conversations become shorter. Meetings end faster. Fewer people challenge you without preparation. Not because you demanded respect, but because the environment changed. Machiavelli believed that power is not about force. It's about managing expectations. When people expect explanation, they demand it. When they stop expecting it, they adapt, and the most important shift happens inside you. You stop feeling the need to convince. You stop feeling drained after conversations. You stop replaying discussions in your head, wondering how to explain things better next time. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped misunderstanding your role. You are not responsible for making everyone understand. You are responsible for making decisions that hold. And once that becomes clear, explaining becomes a choice again, not a reflex. That is the difference Machiavelli understood. Once you stop explaining by default, a new question appears. When should you explain, if at all? This is where Machiavelli thinking becomes practical rather than philosophical. He did not believe in silence for its own sake. He believed in timing. Niccolò Machiavelli observed that explanation is powerful only when it is rare. When people receive it occasionally, they value it. When they receive it constantly, they feel entitled to it. So he treated explanation like a limited resource, not a moral obligation. Powerful people explain only after something has already been accepted. Never before. Once a decision is carried out, once direction is followed, then context may be shared. This order matters. If explanation comes first, it invites debate. If it comes later, it feels like insight. Most people reverse this without realizing it. They explain in advance, hoping agreement will follow. Machiavelli saw this as backward. Agreement rarely comes from understanding. It comes from seeing that things move forward regardless of personal opinion. This is why powerful people often explain calmly after the fact, not to justify themselves, but to frame reality. At that point, the explanation doesn't weaken authority. It reinforces it. It sounds less like persuasion and more like clarification. Another important distinction Machiavelli made was between explanation and reassurance. Explanation deals with structure and reasoning. Reassurance deals with emotion. The mistake many people make is mixing the two. When someone is anxious, insecure, or resistant, no amount of explanation will settle them. They are not looking for logic. They are looking for comfort. Powerful people recognize this quickly. Instead of over-explaining, they shorten communication. They reduce options. They make things simpler, not deeper. This is not manipulation. It is alignment. You don't speak philosophy to someone who wants certainty. You don't give strategy to someone who needs direction. You meet people at the level they can actually use. Machiavelli also understood that explanation works best when it is selective. Not everyone needs to know everything. In fact, when too many people are given reasoning, the reasoning itself loses strength. It becomes fragmented, mistake, and misunderstood, so powerful people explain fully to a few, partially to some, and not at all to most. This creates clarity instead of confusion. It also protects ideas from being diluted. Another thing happens when explanation becomes intentional instead of automatic. You start observing reactions. You notice who listens carefully and who interrupts, who asks thoughtful questions and who looks for loopholes who use. He is always watching, always learning, always guarding the citadel. The door to the cage is open. You have walked out. Don't walk back in just because you miss the company. Keep walking into the dark, into the deep. That is where the treasure is. If this opened your eyes, understand this is only what I can show publicly. There are videos I cannot upload for everyone. There are aspects of dark psychology that I simply cannot discuss publicly on YouTube without being censored or demonetized. The algorithm suppresses the most powerful information. Those exist behind the join button. If you're still here, you're not like the others. Subscribe if you haven't, but if you want what's hidden, click the join button and step into the architect level. You will unlock exclusive uncensored videos that dive into the deepest parts of the human psyche. Most won't, that's the point. Connect with new update comment below your thoughts.